when empathy was the missing piece, lessons from the Pharisees. Hey everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Solitude with Soleil, where I share my thoughts with you in solitude directly from my mind to the mic. I'm your host, Daniel, and before we dive into today's message, I just want to say, wow, y'all have been so encouraging. Someone even messaged me recently and said they wished I posted every single day because they start their mornings with devotionals and they want my voice to be a part of that routine. That's wildly humbling, and I'm truly grateful. But I also believe that powerful words need time to simmer. That's why, for now, I've decided to post 3 times a week: Sundays, Wednesdays, and Friday nights. That way, the message has room to breathe, and so do you. So all right, let's get into it. Before we do, as a reminder, this is a compassionate, non-judgmental, and all-inclusive space for both members and non-members of the church. So if you know someone who could benefit from this message, please share. Let's go. Let's talk about why empathy was the missing piece and how we can learn from the Pharisees. Let's be honest, when most of us heard Pharisees, we heard of judgmental people. They were hypocritical, they were self-righteous, they were pompous, they were arrogant. But I want to slow that down a bit and ask, who were the Pharisees really? Why were they important? And what can we learn from their behavior, especially when it comes to empathy, emotional intelligence, and how we handle relationships? But let me be clear up front. When I say Pharisee, I'm not talking about religious leaders. I'm not talking about titles, and I'm not talking about pastors. I'm talking about a mindset, a set of behaviors that can show up in everyday life, even in us. So who were the Pharisees, for anyone unfamiliar? The Pharisees were a religious group in the New Testament known for their strict interpretation of Jewish law. They were teachers, spiritual authorities, and moral voices in the community. They followed every rule. They were smart. They knew it in detail. But they were often challenged by Jesus, not because they didn't believe in God, but because their belief and their strict legalism toward the rules became more about a performance and pride than compassion. The Pharisees looked righteous, but they didn't love right. Here's the truth. We don't know anything about the Pharisees' personal lives. We don't know what they were silently carrying behind their confidence or behind closed doors. But what Scripture makes clear is this: they lacked empathy. And that lack of empathy became the loudest sermon they ever preached, without even knowing it. So what is empathy really? Empathy isn't an agreement, it's an understanding. It's the ability to put yourself in someone else's shoes, sit with their pain without immediately judging it, listen without assuming, validate without needing to control. And it's something the Pharisees couldn't or wouldn't do. Let's take a powerful example: the Pharisee and the tax collector found in Luke 18. Jesus tells a parable. 2 men go to pray. One is a Pharisee, the other a tax collector, a job seen as corrupt and shameful at the time. The Pharisee prays, "God, I thank you that I'm not like other people, robbers, evildoers, adulterers, or even like this tax collector." Meanwhile, the tax collector won't even lift his head. That's how ashamed he is. He beats his chest and prays, "God, have mercy on me, a sinner." And Jesus says it was the tax collector, not the Pharisee, who went home justified. What if the Pharisee had just asked a question? Let's imagine a different version of the story that I came up with. What if the Pharisee had peeled back his pride and simply said, "Hey, what brought you here today?" And the tax collector replied, "Honestly, I have 3 kids, money is tight, no one would hire me. The only work I could find was collecting taxes. I know people would hate me for it, but I didn't know what else to do." And then what if the Pharisee had responded, "Wow, I'm so sorry you've been going through all of this. That's truly a lot. Actually, I know someone hiring for a position that might be a better fit. Would you be open to that?" That moment right there could have been ministry, but instead it became a missed opportunity. Why? Because the Pharisee was too busy performing holiness to practice humanity. So let's dive into empathy versus contempt and how that affects our interpersonal and parasocial relationships today. What is contempt? It's a cold, quiet judgment that says, "You're beneath me. I would never do what you did." And this is why this episode matters, because when I talk about Pharisees, I'm not talking about ancient history. I'm talking about behaviors that we see in modern day in relationships, families, friendships, even online arguments. it's contempt, it's judgment, it's assuming the worst without pausing to understand the why. In psychology, we talk about the iceberg model of behavior, and you know I love to tie in the spiritual and the psychological tools that explore these stories. What does the iceberg model of behavior show us? Picture an iceberg. You see it on the top of the water, right? You see the ice. But beneath it, there's also a part of the iceberg submerged in water. And in psychology, it's what we see on the surface, the attitude that's just the tip. But beneath the waterline are things like stress, fear, financial pressure, loneliness, and shame. And this is where the Pharisees went terribly wrong. They only saw the tax collector's job, but if he had paused to ask what was beneath it, he would have found or might have found something deeply human. So let's go back to the Pharisees' missed moments to minister. Sometimes people don't need condemnation, they need connection. They need someone who says, I want to understand the pain beneath this. The Pharisees missed that moment so many times, and so do we sometimes when we let pride speak louder than compassion. And let's talk about if your mind is questioning about conflict in relationships. Do conflicts kill our relationships, whether familial, romantic, or friendly or platonic? In real life, sometimes it's not the mistake that ends a relationship, it's how we handle the mistake. In psychology, we call them the 4 horsemen of conflict. It's criticism, you always do this. It's contempt, you're so selfish, I would never do that. It's defensiveness, well, what about you? And it's stonewalling, I'm done talking. That's what the Pharisees did. But the path to healing says, tell me where that came from. Let's slow down and figure this out together. That's emotional intelligence. That's empathy in action. The beautiful thing about conflict is that when handled with maturity, it can open the door to deeper understanding about our partners, our friends, our family, and even ourselves. This is the mark the Pharisees missed. They missed the chance to connect with the very people they harshly judged. The same people they prayed they were better than were the ones Jesus reached out to. The woman with the issue of blood, the adulterer they wanted to stone, even a tax collector. And it just dawned on me, Matthew was also a tax collector who became a disciple. He was also called Levi, and he was sitting at his tax booth when Jesus called him. In Luke 5:27-28, it says, after this, Jesus went out and saw a tax collector by the name of Levi sitting at his tax booth. Follow me, Jesus said to him. And Levi got up, left everything, and followed him. This is what the Pharisees missed. With all their grandeur, their splendor, their accolades, and deep understanding of the law, they missed the opportunity to minister. But here's a caveat. You may be thinking, okay, should we just have empathy for everything? When we see someone going down a wrong path, what do we do? Empathy doesn't erase standards, but it elevates them. Let me be clear, this isn't about abandoning truth. We're still called to have values, we're still called to set boundaries, but empathy reminds us most people already judge themselves really harshly. What they need isn't more shame. What they need is someone who says, you're not alone, and your story doesn't end here. And here's the final point. The Pharisees were too afraid of being seen as broken, but the tax collector's honesty is what made him whole. So today, I invite you to be curious instead of critical. Ask what someone's going through before you assume who they are. Listen before you label, because you never know what someone's fighting through, and the quiet prayer they whisper just might be the one God hears the loudest. Let's talk about the ending of the Pharisee. So what was the ending of the Pharisees? Do we know? I tried to find it. I tried to understand what became of them. Well, Jesus didn't say much. There was no thunder, no rebuke, no divine punishment, just this calm sentence. I tell you that this man, the tax collector, rather than the other, the Pharisee, went home justified before God. That's it. The Pharisee walked away unjustified. They lost the favor of God. They were still in their position, still wearing the title, still respected by many people, but he walked away without favor. But what if the Pharisees' prayers had been different? What if they had said, God, I don't know what this tax collector is going through, but please make a way for him? What if he looked at him and said, God, help him feed his family, help him sleep better tonight, help him find peace in a world that's clearly broken him? That one purr might have changed everything for the tax collector, for the Pharisee, and even for the people watching. But here's what I love to tie in the fact that there is still hope. No one is eternally doomed because God offers something pure. It's called the ability to change. There is still hope. The story of Nicodemus. And if you've ever felt like you've been in the Pharisees' shoes, this one is for you. Though Jesus often rebuked the Pharisees for their legalism, one of them, Nicodemus, he took a different path. He met with Jesus at night, seeking to learn more, and then later, he defended Jesus among his peers. In John 7, verse 51, Nicodemus asked, "Does our law judge a man without first giving him a hearing and learning what he does?" That's a glimpse of empathy. That reminds us that change is possible. That's what empathy does. It doesn't always fix the solution, but it opens the heart. It softens the pride. It lifts burdens, and it invites God in. So to those feeling like the tax collectors of the world, shamed, overlooked, and unworthy, God can still use you, just as he did with Matthew, a tax collector who became a disciple. And to the Pharisees of the world, those who have been harsh, judgmental, or have been hardened, God can still change you, just as he did Nicodemus, a Pharisee who went on to display empathy. Thank you for spending this moment in solitude with me. If this message touched you, feel free to share it, tag me, talk about it, let it simmer, and I'll see you again for the next episode right here on Solitude with Soleil, where I share my thoughts with you in solitude. As usual, stay grounded, stay glowing, and stay soft enough to love others and display empathy. Bye!